The Verak exploratory fleet expected to find wilderness. Instead, they found steel. From orbit, the planet below was scarred in straight lines, mountain ranges sliced open to make gun batteries, valleys turned into armored bunkers, and black warships drifting silently in low orbit like predators. Captain Threx had studied human history. They were supposed to be scattered, fragile, peaceful. This colony didn't match the records. It looked ready. Then the first transmission came. Calm, human, unshaken. Unknown vessels, you are trespassing in sovereign space. Withdraw, or we open fire. The Verak Empire prided itself on knowing the galaxy. Every charted world, every trade route, every species worth noticing recorded, catalogued, controlled. So when the Verak exploratory fleet entered the Talaris sector, the readings made no sense. A Class M planet, far from major lanes, showing dense industrial signatures, but no official record of habitation. At first, Captain Threx assumed it was a smuggler base, or perhaps a breakaway alien faction. Then the images came in. The planet was a fortress. From high orbit, their sensors raised kilometers-long trench lines. Along the equator, too uniform to be natural, too heavily shielded to be simple infrastructure. Heat plumes marked the positions of buried reactors. And the orbital layer, not satellites for communication, but weapons platforms, railgun arrays, missile silos, and something far older, kinetic kill rods suspended in micro-orbits. The Verak were predators by nature, but even predators feel unease when prey stares back at them. Threx stood in the bridge pit, his talons tapping on the polished obsidian floor. Status on their transmissions? The comms officers' frills flattened nervously. Encrypted, repeating patterns, military grade, not a language in our core databanks. The silence that followed was heavy. An unrecorded species should be primitive Stone Age, at worst Iron Age. But this was a civilization ready for war. Threx's second in command, Commander Dral, tried to lighten the air. Perhaps they are old colonists abandoned by a parent empire. Could be easy too. He didn't finish. The tactical board lit red. Every orbital weapon they'd mapped had just pivoted directly toward them. They see us, the gunnery officer hissed. A transmission cut through the void, low and human. No pomp, no ceremony, just controlled authority. Unknown vessels, you are entering sovereign human space. Identify yourselves, or you will be fired upon. The word human made Threx's throat constrict. Humans existed, yes, but Earth was weak, fractured, a cultural footnote in galactic politics. They had no colonies this far out, no fleets, no war machines like these. Transmit diplomatic codes, Threx ordered. Show them we are Verak Imperial explorers operating under peaceful charter. The reply was slower this time, like the speaker was savoring the moment. The Verak Empire declared war on us 80 years ago. You didn't win. You just didn't find us. The bridge went still. Threx's claws tightened on the rail. The human Verak war was ancient history. The record said humanity's deep colonies were annihilated in the first strikes, their fleets scattered. Yet here was proof of a lie. A voice returned, sharper. We survived. We built. We armed ourselves. And we've been waiting for you. Almost on cue, their sensors screamed with missile locks, dozens, then hundreds, all targeted on the Verak fleet. Threx felt the chill crawl down his spine. This was no peaceful rediscovery. This was the front line of a war the galaxy had forgotten and the humans had not. Far below, in the fortified command citadel of Ironhold City, Colonel Mara Vance watched the alien ships on her tactical holomap. 80 years. That was how long her people had been cut off, believed dead by their enemies, abandoned by the rest of humanity. The first years had been about survival. The next decades had been about building weapons powerful enough to make the Verak think twice. And now, the day had come. She keyed the planetary defense net. This is Vance. Targeting solutions confirmed. All batteries hold for my mark. Her father's voice echoed in her mind, a man who had fought in the First War, who had died swearing the Verak would pay in blood. No one on this planet had forgotten. And today, neither would the galaxy. Captain Trex had seen battles. He had watched starships burn in the cold void, their hulls torn open, their crews vented into nothingness. But this wasn't the chaos of a fight. This was precision, discipline. The human fleet moved like a single organism, shifting into attack formations without a single wasted maneuver. Every gun platform turned in unison, like they'd been waiting for this exact moment their entire lives. Captain, the gunnery officer rasped, his voice trembling despite the Verak tendency toward bravado. Missile signatures now at 300. Range optimal for first strike. Trex didn't answer immediately. He studied the display, trying to make sense of what he saw. Humans weren't supposed to have this kind of coordination. The official records painted them as chaotic, emotional, easily divided. But what floated before him was the opposite calm, lethal unity. Open a second channel, Trex ordered. This time, tell them we wish to speak to their leadership directly. The comms officer obeyed, sending the request on multiple encrypted bands. For a moment, there was silence. Then the reply came, same voice, same measured tone. You're speaking to her, not him. Trex narrowed his eyes. Identify yourself. Colonel Mara Vance, commanding officer of the Ironhold Defense Net, last surviving daughter of Admiral Marcus Vance, commander of the Second Human Fleet at the Battle of Orin's Gate. The name hit like a kinetic round to Trex's chest. He knew the Battle of Orin's Gate. Every Verak officer did. It was where the human deep colony fleets had made their final stand, and where the Verak believed they had wiped them out. Admiral Vance's ship had been reported destroyed, vaporized in the opening salvo. Trex's voice was lower now. Your people, you shouldn't exist. Your fleet, your entire sector was annihilated. A pause. Then the human's reply cut through, sharp enough to draw blood. We learned, Captain, that when the Verak say annihilated, what they mean is we stopped looking. On the planet below, Mara stood with her arms folded behind her back, eyes locked on the hollow map. She knew the psychology of the Verak. They believed in dominance. Either you bowed or you bled. The only language they understood was strength. And she was going to speak it fluently. Captain, she said, her voice carrying the weight of 80 years of silence, your fleet is now in the kill zone of every orbital and ground-based battery on this planet. I have the launch authority to remove you from existence before you can fire a single shot. On the Verak bridge, the crew shifted uncomfortably. Every officer there knew the math. Those human weapons might not be as advanced as Imperial tech, but at this range, numbers would overwhelm shields. It would be mutual destruction. Dral leaned close to Trex, voice low. Captain, these humans are not bluffing. Trex didn't need telling them. The eyes on the tactical display told him everything. These humans weren't defending out of fear. They were defending out of promise. A promise that someone, somewhere, would pay for what had happened 80 years ago. But Threx had another problem. This was supposed to be a clean exploration run, no warships beyond standard escort. If he ordered an attack here, it would be bloody and it would draw the Empire's attention. Which meant, if these humans survived this engagement, word would spread, and the Empire might face something it hadn't in centuries, an enemy that remembered. Colonel Vance, Threx said carefully, if we withdraw, will you allow us safe passage? Her answer was instant. You will leave. You will erase every scrap of this system from your charts. And you will tell your empire that humanity is not finished. The bridge was silent. Threx could feel every officer watching him, waiting for his decision. He looked once more at the human formations, rows upon rows of steel and firepower, a civilization that had built itself into a weapon. He realized then, if he ordered an attack now, the Verak might win the battle. But they would lose the war. Far below, Mara's second-in-command leaned toward her. Colonel, what if they decide to call your bluff? She didn't look away from the display. It's not a bluff. Her finger hovered over the launch command. One twitch, and the sky above would light up with the fire of a war that had been 80 years in the making.
80 years earlier, before the Virak thought them dead, the colony on Erebus 9 had been just another deep space settlement. Barely 100,000 people, self-sufficient mining outposts, a handful of orbital docks. They were far from Earth, too far for help to come quickly. When the war began, the Verak struck without warning. The sky burned for weeks. Cities were turned into glass. The colony's defense ships, mere frigates, were picked off one by one. But the Verak made a mistake. They assumed destruction meant extinction. Among the survivors was Admiral Marcus Vance, commanding the Second Human Fleet. In those last days of the Battle of Orin's Gate, he knew the Verak were tightening the noose. Instead of retreating toward Earth, he took a different path into the black, toward uncharted space. They lost contact with the rest of humanity that day, and for most, that would have been the end. For Vance, it was the beginning. The colony buried itself literally. Vast underground cities were carved into mountains, shielded by layers of rock and alloy. Factories were moved deep below the crust. Farms thrived in caverns lit by artificial suns. On the surface, they built decoys, fake settlements, hollow warships, and cities designed to burn spectacularly should the Verak return. Beneath, the real Erebus 9 was awake and building. The first years were about survival, water, air, food. But the children of those survivors grew up with a different education. History classes began with the names of the dead. Every student learned marksmanship before they learned calculus. Military drills were as common as morning prayers. By the third decade, the colony was producing weapons the original settlers could never have imagined: hybrid railguns, missile swarms, kinetic drop platforms. They lacked the elegance of galactic designs, but they had one advantage. They were made for one enemy, and one enemy only. And Admiral Vance, he never stopped preparing. And before his death, he recorded a single message for the future commander of the defense net. One day, the Verak will come again. They will expect us to kneel. When they do, you will stand, and you will make them remember what they chose to forget. That message now lived in the mind of his daughter. Colonel Mara Vance had been a child when she last saw her father alive. She had grown into his shadow, wearing his rank, his resolve, and his war. Present day, On the Verak flagship, Spear of Dominion, Captain Threx studied the human formations again. Their weapons were not as sleek as Imperial tech, but their density, it was terrifying. This was not a defense line hastily thrown together. It was a kill box, every approach covered, every escape lane calculated. Dral whispered from his station. Captain, if we signal for reinforcements, we'll bring the full wrath of the Empire here. But it will take weeks to arrive. Threx's frill stiffened. Weeks? Plenty of time for these humans to vanish again, or worse, retaliate. On Erebus 9, Mara's war room was a storm of quiet efficiency. Targeting grids updated in real time. Every officer at their post. Missile crew stood by with launch hatches open. Her second in command leaned in. Colonel, all batteries report green. Orbital fleet ready on your word. Mara stared at the Verak formation. Those sharp, predatory ships she had seen in grainy war footage as a child. The same shapes that had turned her homeworld skies into fire. Her voice was low. First volley, staggered launch. 2-second intervals. We'll bleed them before they know they're hit. The first shot, it was a single missile. Launched from the human cruiser Defiance, its engine burned for only 3 seconds before it went cold, vanishing from sensors. The Verak didn't even flinch until it reappeared mere kilometers from their forward escort, its casing splitting open to unleash a swarm of tungsten penetrators. The escort ship's shields caught some. Not enough. The bridge of the Verak vessel lit up white before the hull split in two. On the Spear of Dominion, alarms wailed. If the humans hadn't fired a test shot, they'd drawn blood. Then they're committing. Threx bared his teeth. So be it. Return fire. All ships. Full counter volley. Void erupted missiles, rail slugs, energy beams, cutting through the dark like threads of light and steel. The war had begun again. A void between the fleets turned white with fire. Missiles flared like miniature suns. Railgun slugs streaked as invisible spears, and energy beams carved across the darkness in silent fury. The Verak fought like predators, fast strikes, precise kills, overwhelming their prey with speed. But these humans, they fought like something older, something that had lived in war for generations. Every human volley was layered. First the decoys, then the swarmers, then the kinetic hammers that crack shields open for the rail slugs to punch through. The Verak were used to prey scattering under fire. The humans advanced instead. On the Verak flagship, Captain Threx gripped the rail as another escort ship went up in a bloom of molten alloy. The human tactics were crude by Imperial standards, but relentless. Where the Verak sought a perfect kill, the humans sought only one thing: attrition. Every shot meant to hurt, to bleed, to grind them down. Thrall shouted over the roar of the bridge alarms. Captain, their targeting is predictive. They're adjusting mid-battle, anticipating our maneuvers. That should have been impossible for a civilization this primitive. But Threx was starting to understand they weren't primitive. They were focused on the human cruiser Iron Resolve. Colonel Mara Vance stood in the forward tactical bay, eyes fixed on the holographic projection of the battlefield. Her voice was calm, measured, each command a scalpel cut. Squadron Delta, break right on my mark. 3, 2, 1, now. The Verak strike group surged into the gap exactly as predicted. Moments later, the hidden human gun platforms in the asteroid belt flared to life, ripping the lead Verak destroyer in half. Ara didn't smile. She didn't celebrate. She was her father's daughter, and she knew this battle wasn't about victory. It was about message. Half an hour into the engagement, both sides were bleeding. The humans had lost 3 cruisers, countless orbital platforms. The Verak had lost a third of their escort fleet. It should have been enough for a mutual withdrawal. But the Verak didn't retreat from prey. And humans didn't retreat at all. The turning point. On the Sphere of Dominion, Threx received an urgent feed human transmissions bouncing into deep space on encrypted bursts. Not to their own fleet. To other systems. To other humans. Ral's eyes went wide. Captain, if they've been in hiding all this time, Threx finished the thought, then there may be more of them, armies we've never charted. And they'll know we found them. In that instant, the battle became something bigger than ships and guns. It was the moment the Verak realized they hadn't just stumbled on a lost colony. They had awoken an entire sleeping war machine. Mara's Gambit. Back on Iron Resolve, Mara watched the Verak formations tighten into a defensive ball. They were preparing for a final push or for a retreat covered by heavy fire. They're thinking about leaving, her second-in-command said. Mara's jaw set. Leaving wasn't enough. They needed to fear coming back. Order the fleet full burn toward their flagship. I want their commander to see us in his scope and know exactly who ended his day. The human cruisers ignited their drives, cutting through the battle like a spearhead. The Verak flagship shields flared under the concentrated barrage, every strike hammering home the message Admiral Vance had promised decades ago. The last transmission. As the Spear of Dominion buckled under the assault, Threx gave the only order that could save his crew. All ships break off. Withdraw to deep space, now. The Verak fleet scattered, drives burning hot, fleeing the kill box they had wandered into. Before they cleared sensor range, a final human transmission cut across all bands. Ara's voice, steady and cold. Tell your empire, humanity remembers. Aftermath. The wreckage of both fleets drifted silently above Erebus 9, a steel graveyard in the dark. On the surface, repair crews were already at work. No one spoke of peace. No one spoke of safety. In the war room, Mara replayed her father's old message one more time. When they come, you will stand. She had stood. And now the galaxy knew the lost human colony had not only survived, it had prepared for war. Somewhere out there, she knew other human enclaves might be listening to the battle reports, and when the time came, they would rise too. The Verak thought they had found prey. What they had found was the return of the predators.